Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, May 6, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
So we have Hamas at home and abroad. And I don't know where you want to start. We could talk about the looming Rafah.
Yeah, let's start abroad.
You want to start abroad? Okay. So the United States has been desperately trying to keep alive a negotiation between Israel and Hamas that died 2 weeks ago, and has impressed upon Israel the need to continue to relax its demands on its side, leading to a ceasefire. Meaning that the number of hostages that Israel is asking for has dropped. Various other conditions have been loosened. In response, Hamas simply has said no to every iteration of this, with the addendum that it's happy to continue negotiating. Or not happy, but it will continue to negotiate. And maybe yesterday, this whole farce came to an end, maybe, because Hamas said no, Israel said we're done. Israel started telling Palestinians in Rafah to move, set up sort of a tent city, not on the south lawn of Columbia University, although that would be kind of funny, for Gazans to move to. And yet, Bill Burns, the CIA
we should add three
yes.
Israeli soldiers were also killed at a border crossing.
We should add that, because not only was the border crossing, which has been open due to U.S. pressure said we need more access points into Gaza. So they opened the Erez crossing, and it was slammed with rocket fire. Not the Erez crossing, excuse me. It's the crossing down in the south, right near
Kerem Shalom.
Kerem Shalom. Yeah. And so the United States is not to blame for any act of Hamas's, but I think it's fair to say that due to the fact that Israel opened up this crossing, and there are Israelis therefore stationed there, whatever, that it was a target. The pier that is now being constructed in the Mediterranean, which seems to be a series of connected floating platforms, was attacked last week by a Hamas rocket. So they don't want the aid. They're trying to get Israel to close down the aid. And interestingly enough, Cindy McCain, who is running apparently the World Food Program, which I didn't really know until I didn't notice, announced that they have enough aid. They have 3 months worth of aid. So now the only issue is, how does Israel get the aid in a timely fashion without it being taken by Hamas? And of course, last week, as we talked about on the podcast, Antony Blinken stood on a platform or something and watched approvingly as a truck crossed into Hamas with the food for the first time through the Erez crossing, at which point it was promptly hijacked by Hamas and supposedly returned back to food distributors, though that is a supposed, because we have absolutely no confirmation of that.
So the best way to get the food to the Palestinians would be to defeat Hamas and allow Israel to go into Rafah to defeat the final Hamas brigades, which is stunning to me now in media descriptions of Rafah. I heard one on NPR on the way into work this morning, where they said Rafah, where millions of Palestinians have sheltered from Israel's brutal war. No mention of the terrorist organization that is holding captives there, not to mention the other Palestinians it's using as human shields. It was a remarkable elision of the whole reason for this war, which you see again in the media. I just want to say another thing about the negotiations. It's stunning, the inability of this administration to not recognize Hamas for what it is, or alternatively, the cynicism of this administration knowing what Hamas is, and yet still playing this kabuki theater negotiation in order to delay the Rafah operation. Hamas has asked for one thing throughout this negotiation or series of talks. That is an end to the war and a withdrawal of Israeli troops. That's what Hamas has been asking for throughout. And Hamas has vetoed any proposal that doesn't include those two things. And so you got around to this weekend. And why did Hamas say no? Because the generous offer negotiated by the United States pressuring Israel did not include a permanent end to the war and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. We know this is what Hamas wants, and yet we've continued to play this game where we say, oh, well, we have to continue dialogue. Why? Why does the administration want to protect Hamas and Rafah? I think that's the real question that needs to be asked.
Well, I don't think it wants to protect Hamas and Rafah. I mean, I think that's the net effect, is that they're protecting Hamas and Rafah. I think they have lost the thread, and that this is a particular problem with democratic administrations, which is to say that diplomatic negotiations in these administrations really do quickly become an end in themselves, that almost become divorced from the goal of the negotiation, and the fact that when you are negotiating with bad actors who are negotiating in bad faith, there is a point at which the negotiation actually starts harming you, even though you haven't necessarily given anything up yet. It harms you in the eyes of others who can't quite understand what you're up to. It harms you in the eyes of your negotiating partners who see weakness in the way you continue to say, let's sit down and have more, potato chips and keep talking. And this one major difference between the parties in the United States is that diplomatic negotiation is a very profound fetish. I'm now being emotionally and policy-wise generous here in attributing a psychological aspect to this, but I do believe it's true that this is 3 generations from the nuclear test ban onward, an idea that negotiations in themselves are a thing of emotional, moral, and political value, and Republicans simply have an easier time saying the hell with it. I'm sorry, I'm not getting off this lot with this car. And so I'm walking away. I'm not wasting my time with this anymore.
I think it also shows that the administration is stuck in a pre-October 7th view of Hamas. Right? Wasn't the concepcia that, well, now that Israel's out of Gaza, Hamas has to govern Gaza. Hamas is going to be responsible to its people. It wants them to get the jobs in Israel. It wants to have economic development. And yeah, sure, every few years or so, we're going to have to mow the lawn. But at the end of the day, we know that Hamas, it's just going to kind of tend to itself. And that conception was blown apart in the most disgusting way on October 7th. And we know what Hamas's true purpose is. It is to eliminate Jews, eliminate the state of Israel. It seems to me that the administration is still in this view that, well, Hamas must want to help its people. We can talk to Hamas, and Hamas can, it's up to Hamas, as Anthony Blinken was saying when he visited the region last week. It's up to Hamas if they want to show that they're going to be a part of this, whatever solution, to this crisis. They need to abandon that.
But you guys don't think that this is all fundamentally because the administration is scared to death of the radicals? I mean,
in the United States?
Yeah, in the United States. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I have a very hard time believing. I mean, I agree with Matt. That is certainly how they're acting. The administration is acting as if they believe there's a possibility that Hamas is some sort of partner for peace on behalf of Gazans. I don't think they believe that. I think it's all to stall any action. They started out with a policy of appeasement, not international. A policy of appease. The administration started out with the policy of appeasing the radicals at home, and they are stuck in that policy now. And I don't know how they get out of it.
I would say that that's an important aspect of this, but because they have this natural default to the diplomacy fetish, it kind of gets them out of the, yeah, we're incredibly cynical, we're just worried about Michigan. It's that this is a good, like,
Right.
it's good to talk. We're just trying to talk. After all, we're all people. We all love our children. We all, everybody wants their own piece of the pie, and that's what we can do. And it is a,
But
it is a very, yeah.
that was actually, and that approach, I not to play devil's advocate here, but that approach, there was a window in which if you believe diplomacy is possible, and I think we are a little more realpolitik on this podcast and didn't think that that was possible with Hamas. But I think from a public perception of it, yeah, that sounds good. It sounds good to like, don't just go in there and blow everything up. Let's talk first. Let's see if there's some way we can compromise. But at this point, they're like the parents of wayward kids sitting down every 2 weeks and going, we want you to make better choices. And then the kid runs out and crashes the car. Then they're like, that wasn't the right choice. Let's make a better choice next time. And it starts to become both condescending to suggest that they're going to make the right choice, but also dangerous, obviously, for the people, not only Israelis, but for a lot of the people who I think would like to see this end. And the scolding of the Israeli government that happens with this has gotten to a point where I cannot believe they tolerate anything that comes out of Tony Blinken's mouth.
I want to play the part of Abe here and say the line, but it's worse than that. Because it's not just this negotiation fetish. We have this report from Axios today that the administration has held up a weapons shipment
that has been congressionally appropriated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, Donald Trump impeached for temporarily holding aid to an ally, Ukraine, right? According to Axios, the administration doing this now in order to distance itself from any Rafah operation. We have this other looming crisis with the ICC and the threat
That's the International Criminal Court.
Right. The International Criminal Court might actually issue an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, who, by the way, is about to be invited to address a joint session of Congress at the request of first Speaker Mike Johnson. And then late last week, we heard that Chuck Schumer, who has called for Netanyahu's removal, also joining in the request. I think there are points of leverage that this administration is using in order to forestall a necessary military operation to end the war, which then just again raises a question to me. Why? What is the point? What is the objective here? The way to end the war is to allow Israel to move into Rafah. We always knew that that's the way. And yet the administration is doing everything it can to prevent that outcome. And it does raise very troubling questions about this administration's policy and its regional approach, going back now for months.
Okay, I'm going to now imitate Abe and say it's worse than that.
It's like
the Axios. Here's why. The Axios
God, it's
story,
doom all the way down.
Well, we're now like, to the third power.
When Christine has to do it after I'm done. Okay, just to square this, just to finish up. The Axios story comes from Biden White House and administration stenographer Barak Ravid, an Israeli journalist who now works for Axios and won a big award at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, thus proving that he is a stenographer for anti-Israel forces, because who else would win? They found an Israeli to give the award to who is serving the interests of non-Israelis. I bring this up because that report has not been confirmed by any other media source, and Ravid will publish anything anybody puts in his ear, and it's possible that they haven't held up a shipment, and that someone's telling Barack Ravi that they held up a shipment in order to make it appear as though Biden is scolding Israel and trying to hold them back from Rafah, whereas in fact they're not. So you get this double-edged bind, or whatever you want to call it, in which in fact the aid is flowing, but the Biden administration might want the world to think that it's not. And therefore, once again, is getting the worst of all possible worlds here, which is that the United States is supporting the war of Israel against Hamas and then pretending that it's kind of standing apart, which it is because we're not involving American troops, but it's kind of standing apart. And like Bella Karolyi is training Israel like it's the gymnastics team and abusing them at the same time and attacking them and making them feel as though they're terrible and failures and monsters. But he's also their coach.
Okay, I got it. It's worse than that.
Okay, yay!
Yay!
Okay,
they are doing the exact opposite domestically. They are actually supporting a lot of the pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian protests on campus by saying little and doing nothing. At the same time, they are pretending that they care. So we just had a story that the second gentleman for Holocaust Remembrance Day is going to bring some Jewish college students to the White House to really sit down and talk about how troubling it is that, wow, this anti-Semitism thing is really taking off. And it's so cynical and so obviously a photo op for the administration that refuses really to come out very strongly against what's happening on college campuses.
Abe, I'm going to be very interested to see who goes to that meeting, because we had a story last week that Jewish organizations asked the Department of Education for a meeting to discuss the question of whether Jewish students were having their Title VI rights. Rights were being violated in a way that would invoke a Title VI of the Department of Education Funding Act, or whatever it's called, making sure that no ethnic group or whatever is being discriminated against. And the call was scheduled as a Zoom, and then it was discovered that two groups, I believe Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now, had been included on the call with the American Jewish Committee, the B'nai B'rith, the Anti-Defamation League, and other groups. And Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now are anti-Zionist organizations. And somebody at the Department of Education put them on the list to be parts of this call. And then 7 or 8 Jewish organizations said, we cannot be on a call with these people. They're enemies of the Jewish people. And something happened. The call was split into 2 or something like that. So I don't know who they're going to invite. And I am going to be very interested to see whom the second gentleman, whose own daughter has played footsie with anti-Zionist organizations, is going to have sitting at that table. And by the way, isn't he wonderful? Let's bring out our Jew. Here's our Jew, everybody. Jew meets other people.
But
Jew. Jew eat? No, Jew?
If legitimate organizations pull out of these things, because If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace, the only ones left are the anti-Zionists, right? I mean,
so it's a rock and a hard place problem, right? That's what the administration is causing here.
Yeah, but maybe not for them. But I don't. The administration kind of likes those people to be the representative Jewish voice on this. I mean, that's or they take it to be maybe. I think they're more fooled by that than they are by Hamas. I think they have a better sense of what Hamas is. I'm not sure that they understand what those groups are up to, because those groups, by the way, are backed by the very same donors that back actual legitimate Democratic candidates, including Biden. So there's a lot of tangled up resources in this.
I find it very hard to believe that the liaison for Jewish affairs in the White House doesn't know the ideological layout of the Jewish community in the United States. There is such a person. That's
literally their job. That is that person's job.
Right. And it may well be that person, and the likelihood is that person, again, I don't know who it is.
Right.
but that person has been told to be friend to not to pick fights and take sides in the intra-Jewish in the intra-Jewish conflict over what happened after October 7th. A Jewish organization that calls for ceasefire, like Truah, which is a rabbi's organization, should not be, like excluded. Although I'm sure that, I don't think the Zionist Organization of America is getting any, which is a very right-wing organization, is getting any invitations to the White House anytime soon. Anyway.
But John, also there's
yeah.
the possibility, and I don't know who that person is either, but there's also the possibility that person is sympathetic to these
there is
radical voices, because when it's always a shock when you see who staffs Democratic administrations. I mean, there's always when you look into their histories and whatever. But I don't know in this individual case.
Okay, Shelley Greenspan is the White House liaison to the American Jewish Committee. So we now need to parse who Shelley Greenspan is, because I, again, don't know who she is. Of course, the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. I say, of course, because that's now, that's now a very big calling card for anybody. The grandchild of a Holocaust survivor. Shelley graduated cum laude from the University of Florida with degrees in political science and public relations and minors in Judaic studies and public leadership. She served as a foreign affairs officer at State and as senior partnership manager for the Academy of Women Entrepreneurs, a U.S. government program. Before joining the State Department, she worked as a global innovation policy associate at Amazon and on the policy and research team for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. And she did work for AIPAC. So my guess is that she is not a radical. She is just a kind of classic go along to get along, right. Wearing, sort of like her Jewish credentials have stood her in good stead in all kinds of places. And the last thing that she is offensive to either side. Like, she is not going to be somebody who Bernie Sanders people are going to call up the White House congressional liaison and say, why do you have this Bibi Netanyahu person there at the White House? Nor is anybody, so that's my guess is. But does she know who, Simone Zimmerman, the head of If Not Now and the leading young anti-Zionist voice in the United States is? Of course she does. I don't think Simone Zimmerman will be at the White House. That would be too provocative. But a Simone Zimmerman could certainly be there today. And that's the footsie. That's the gamesmanship that's going on, which is it's worse than that part of this, or gets to the cynicism question. And I do think that they're cynical, but I also think that they do have this idea in their heads that deep down we're all the same. And Hamas is a murderous, murderous Islamist. It's not exactly a death cult, because the death cults were the Palestinians in the early 2000s who figured out how to get people to wear suicide vests and blow themselves up. Hamas is an army. And
it's also a death cult.
Point of arm,
because it gets Gazans killed.
Right, but it's not a death cult, right? That's just a sort of, that's their version of the Stalingrad strategy. Right. Like, you use whatever advantage you have to hand, and the advantage you have to hand is that you can hide from the Israeli bombs, but the citizens can't. So you use them as cannon fodder. But they're not a death cult. Like, what they want is for their people to survive so they can pop out of a hole and kill an Israeli and then pop back in the hole. They're not looking for them to, do a one-time spectacular thing that just, scares everybody but doesn't really have any strategic or tactical value. That was the Second Intifada.
I think, just to broaden the scope a little bit, it's really incredible to me when you see the vast array of institutions and individuals trying to prevent Israel's success in this war. And I say this because I'm looking at a CNN feed, and here's UNICEF warning that Rafah is now a city of children who have nowhere safe to go in Gaza. So that will be the storyline. If Israel goes into Rafah, the children, no mention of why the war is happening or why these children are at risk, which is all Hamas. Then you have our friend Guterres, the United Nations. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is the UN. The UNRWA people. Imagine that. The UNRWA people are saying now an Israeli military
They're very
offensive,
credible, Matt. Very
will
credible,
lead to an additional layer of an already unbearable tragedy. So there you have the long game that has been played by the enemies of Israel to corrupt international institutions like the United Nations or the International Criminal Court. On top of that, you have the reaction, which I find stunning, to Israel's decision to ban Al Jazeera, which came over the weekend. Every media critic, professor of journalism in the Western world is denouncing this move. I see here the Germany's Foreign Office posted on X the following, I quote, "A free and diverse press landscape is an important cornerstone of any liberal democracy. Especially in times of crisis, it is particularly important to protect the freedom of the press. The Israeli authorities' decision to close Al Jazeera in Israel sends the wrong signal." Well, that's fascinating. What is press freedom like in Saudi Arabia or in Jordan or in Syria or in Iran? Like the idea that this selective indignation over Israel shutting down a media site that does nothing but promote Jew hatred and incitement toward Jews and the pro-Hamas perspective, and yet
employs terrorists.
And employs terrorists.
That's
and you don't talk about the others, the state of press freedom in the Arab world. Moreover, we are having a very serious debate in our country right now over whether TikTok should be permitted. What is the argument against TikTok? The argument against TikTok is that it's owned by an enemy of the United States of America. Al Jazeera is owned by Qatar, which is clearly not acting in good faith in any way throughout this entire process. It too wants Hamas to survive. So then finally, I'm sorry, the final institution I want to talk about is the universities, which have been corrupted by the Arab money now for decades.
Decades, yes.
Setting up these programs which do nothing but indoctrinate and inflame the students who participate in Middle Eastern studies against Israel.
Import students
and
born
professors
in these
professors,
lands,
and the professors, the tenured professors.
That's part of the appeasement strategy that Brown and Northwestern engaged. The promise of we will hire Palestinian professors.
That just happened at the University of Chicago
and Chicago
yesterday.
Now. Right,
University of Chicago,
3 universities
my alma mater, has promised to hire 8 Palestinian scholars. And here is my challenge to the University of Chicago: hire 8 Palestinian scholars, put them all in the medical school, train doctors. Okay, you know what they don't need? More political scientists. They don't need more sociologists. They don't need more Arab bullshit academics. Send them to the medical schools. Doctors, let's do that. That's great.
That's the only degrees rewarded at Gaza University is in anti-Israel BS. Mm-hmm. I have they have plenty of professors with PhDs in anti-Israel BS that are now going to make their way to American universities as a result of the cravenness of some of these university administrators.
It is, by the way, a perfect analog to Black Lives Matter now, which is, here's our demand. Our demand is to increase the number of people who are paid by the university to come and promote values inimical to race blindness, color blindness, and our civilization. Like, institutionalize it. Let's have the practical effect of going full freight for 9 Palestinian scholars. How many of them would be, say, Palestinian Christians? I wonder. I don't even know. Would a Palestinian who is actually, resident of East Jerusalem and
when they make Rashida Tlaib professor of practice at the University of Chicago.
Yeah, that's always the bullshit appointment. Sorry, pardon my French.
You're absolutely right.
Practice what? Practice radicalism.
Well, I know. Practice anti-Israel hate. She's very good at that.
Yeah. I mean, look, one thing I wanted to bring up, Abe, is so this weekend there were commencement exercises. I heard from a friend of mine who has a kid graduating from who had a kid graduate from Indiana University. So Indiana University is in Bloomington, Indiana. It's in Monroe County, Indiana. It's very far, even it's not far, but it's like an hour and a half from Indianapolis, which is the closest city, and it's actually sort of a southernish town. Like it has more of the flavor of Kentucky, let's say, than it does of, cosmopolitan Indianapolis, if you want to look at it that way. And so there were almost no demonstrators. Like there were 30 demonstrators that were way far away from, okay. And then you have the University of Michigan. So that's in Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor is like a 60-year, it's like Austin or it's this college town in the middle of a Democratic liberal state with a big union population, Arab population, all of that. So they had a huge encampment, and they had people trying to desperately disrupt this commencement ceremony, which took place over 100,000 people or something in the stadium. So it wasn't that successful. But I think once again, you see here the question of how the campuses that are close or in cities, and particularly closer in populous cities with access to a lot of people who don't have much to do and are,
I'll interrupt to say that's my hometown. That's Washington,
yes,
D.C., where at
right.
GW's campus, the statue of George Washington was draped in a keffiyeh and a Palestinian flag and genocide spray painted on it. So yeah, that's exactly what's happening.
And like L.A. So there are not only in L.A. are there a lot of this and that and the other thing, but there's basically, let's face it, there's a lot of white people out of work in L.A. They're all musicians and they're would-be actors and they're this, and that's why every time there's a strike in the entertainment business, there are 10,000 people to wait, to picket and not settle the strike because they're not working. They don't have anything to do. It's like a place you go where you take a job where you don't have to work, and then you try to find a significant other who will support you. And so Chicago, LA, New York, Boston, Austin, which is also like keep Austin weird. So there's a lot of people who hang out in Austin after they graduate from school and have nothing to do. And so there are ready-made populations for these protests that are not serious. And then you have like 20, 30 people a protest who really know what they're doing, right? And have gotten the manuals and have been trained by people who give money to the Tides Foundation. The Tides Foundation distributes it to whoever they are, and they have guides, and they have guides to how to barricade doors and how to get food
fellows.
in.
They have fellows.
Exactly. And so
they pay them.
Right. So
thousands.
So where are we now? So the commencements are happening. Everyone's going to go home, right? It's the second week of May. Everyone's about to start going home. So the college students who are on the campus, Chicago, unfortunately, has another month to go. One of the many delightful aspects of going to the University of Chicago is you stay in school till June, unlike every other college, because it's a drip of a place and always was. So they're there for another month. Who knows what's going to happen there? But here's my question. So a lot of the kids on campus in the encampments and all that are LARPing, right? We discussed this over the week. They're cosplaying. They're like, wow, I get to be a part of a protest. Like it's the college experience. You go to a kegger, you take one tab of LSD, you have a little sex, you take a road trip and you go to a concert, and then you get to do a demonstration. So they got their demonstration, got out of their system. In 5 years, they'll be living in a tacky suburban house, trying to figure out how to get their cars automatic cruise control to work, and this will all be a long forgotten memory. But where do the serious people go now? Where are they headed now that they've lost the cosplayers and they really have to sort of move on into much more serious protest territory?
I don't know that they're going to lose the cosplayers, by the way, but first of all, they'll go back to the streets. This was roaring through the streets before the encampments. So they'll go back to the streets, and they are so well funded and so comprehensively organized. There's undoubtedly plans for another phase, a post post campus phase. I don't know what it is. We all suspect it's going to convene on the convention, on the Democratic convention, probably both conventions. I don't know, but it's going to keep going. And by the way, it's going to get uglier, because it's also going to keep going because the protesters love the press that they're getting here. This excites them so much. The like protest adjacent liberals don't like it because it makes them it tarnishes what they see as a righteous cause. But the actual protesters out there saying crazy things and doing crazy things and being violent, they love it, and they are not giving up the spotlight anytime soon.
May I just make one small point about the schools, John, and these commencement? Many universities have scrapped their in-person commencements, and I see just over the transom that Columbia University announced that it would do the same thing this year. There would be no university-wide commencement. Just came over the headline here.
Whoa.
So let's just take a step back. This is the class of 2024, which meant they graduated from high school in 2020. So these graduating seniors had no in-person high school graduation. And many of them, if you were a student at Columbia or one of the California schools did the same thing, won't have an in-person college graduation. What a tragedy. What a disgusting piece of evidence of what the left has done to the rising generation. I mean, think about that. The double deprivation. On the one hand, because of COVID, certainly it wasn't simply the left that was worried about COVID. But I'd say by May or June, I don't want to be retrospective, the ideas of spread outdoors or whatever, the unanimity of opinion, let's put it that way, that led to the long-term lockdown or social distancing, that was definitely embraced by the American left. I'll just put it that way. And now this, the radical cause of the pro-Hamas protesters and the spinelessness of the liberal elites in these universities, catering or just collapsing in confidence during these protests, has now given these students no in-person graduation. I can't think of a more revealing moment, and it's sad on one level, but it's also very alarming on another, because we're going to have to live with the repercussions of this, especially if the behavior continues for a long time.
Well, this is how you raise a generation that starts to become and is deeply cynical about institutions and about the ability of those in charge to actually keep their word and actually keep order in this case.
We keep having this conversation about the destruction of the institutions, and as conservatives, obviously, we are deep believers in the importance of institutions that are not governmental institutions to provide a ballast against and support and structure against the encroachment of government on our lives, mediating institutions that take the place of government or do things better because they're communal and they're voluntary and all of that. But I mean, it is very hard for me after the last 6 weeks to look at the university culture in the United States and say it's really terrible that people are going to lose faith in the institutions of higher education. I mean, I had a conversation last night with a dear friend who is a parent at the University of Chicago, who was saying to me, what do we do? What can we do? What's our strategy? How do we say, and I was like, you know what? I've had it with this conversation. 1983, A Nation at Risk, the report of the Department of Education, released by the Department of Education, that said that American education was falling behind every other advanced democracy in the world, that our students were scoring badly on tests at all levels, and that instruction had gone bad, everything had gone bad. And for 40 years now, people like us have been sounding the alarm klaxon about the American educational system from nursery school through graduate school. and we've talked about it, and we've yelled about it, and we've published book after book and article after article. Abe, you and I have been at this magazine together, sort of like helping to manage it for more than 15 years. And I would say each year we publish 6 to 7 major articles on some specific failing of the university system. And dating back to my father's tenure, which ended in 1995, and my dear friend Neil Kozlowy's tenure commentary, dating from 1995 to 2009, hundreds of thousands of words, if not millions of words, have been dedicated to this problem. And I'm done. Like, I think I'm done. I think we're done. I think everything that we diagnosed has happened. Like, the cataclysm has now occurred. It is not invisible to anybody. Everybody understands now, or everybody of goodwill understands, that we've reached a point at which we are compelled by circumstance, if we are parents or in Americans, to seek to have our kids attend an elite institution because it is a passport to the upper middle class in the United States. And it's what we have to do to complete our journey as parents. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, because the change I'm now talking about will take a while. But it's a hopeless thing. We are now trapped in a system in which it's like 1983, and we all have to join the Communist Party in the Soviet Union, because if you don't, you're going to end up with a crappy apartment and no, and no resources.
But the conservatives never solved the pipeline into academia problem. This was because conservatives tend to want to do practical things. They start businesses. They go run, they help run other larger businesses. They do all kinds of other things. They don't tend to go certainly into the professoriate at the rate, particularly in the humanities.
But a
little more in business. They used to have a kind of moderate. But there was this moment where conservatives were identifying the left-leaning, extreme left-leaning tilt to the professoriate. And there was this push to let's get more conservatives in that pipeline. It never really happened.
But it didn't work, because I can cite you chapter and verse on individual people, just come popping right into my head. The case of Peter Berkowitz at Harvard. Peter Berkowitz, who writes, people would know him from his weekly writings at Real Clear Politics. Peter was, by all accounts and estimations, the most brilliant young professor at Harvard. And he was a Straussian, and he was denied tenure. Thomas Pangle denied tenure at Yale. I know cases all over the country in the 80s and early 90s, the lesson of which was, don't bother. And 7 years training, and then being a crappy assistant professor grading 500 papers for some airy guy who didn't even bother to learn the students' names in his lecture class. And then you get to your point, and then you're turned down because of your politics. You can't be a sacrificial lamb. You can't go through your entire life trying to get through this, trying to climb this greasy pole, and then get denied at the end. Do something else with your life. It was an incredibly successful way of depressing people and basically telling them that this doorway, this path, and I'm talking about serious people, a lot of people you work with at American Enterprise Institute, who ought to be full professors at universities, or some of them who left the university.
Right.
Because even though they had tenure, because the atmosphere was intolerable. So, I don't think I'm not saying you're blaming the victim.
I'm just saying that there is still that opportunity. If we're going to wholesale, there are the alternative institution argument, which, as you say, will be a multi-generational challenge. But aging out getting rid of these administrators and the aging professoriate, the boomers who we all see now draping themselves in glory and at these protests, those people will have to retire at some point. The question is who replaces them.
Not with Ozempic. They don't have to retire ever. They're going to be life-enhancing drugs, and 90 will be the new 50.
That is a truly dystopian.
They will never leave. They will never leave.
My fear, and it makes me grouchy in advance, if it were to happen, is that, I want to believe that this is the sort of beginning of the end for these corrupt institutions and universities. And I think the donors will not forget. The big donors who are outraged, I think they're done. I think they've washed their hands they've washed their hands of these places, maybe unless they make massive structural changes, which I don't see happening. But my concern, and this is the part that gets me angry, is I fear the average American's capacity to just forget. Like, the myth making of institutions of higher education is such a long-standing thing as compared to, say, just a year of jihad on campus. That I could easily see, future parents being like, "Oh, well, that's all died down now, right? I mean, I still want my kid to, I still want that credential," and that's my fear.
That was the Saturday Night Live skit where the dad drops Dakota, whatever her name is, off at college. She's like, "It's okay, Dad. It's just Al Qaeda." She's like, "What? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Now it's Hamas."
Yeah. No, I mean, look, that is a real. Everything you're saying is real. But one thing that Matt said, I think, is very important, which is that the collegiate experience of people over the 4 years since 2020, which involved not only not having starting in COVID, but also the first year of their academic lives being spent on Zoom, having finished their high school careers on Zoom, sometimes moving to cities and living in a house with people nowhere near campus because campus was closed, and then having the ending of their careers disrupted, having basically spent 3 years or 2.5 years at most actually at school. That's a very large population of people. That's 4 years of people. You could actually say, if you stretched it out through you could have a gigantic donor crisis. I mean, you really could. You could have people who remember their college experiences without a lot of fondness and without a lot of positive reinforcement and without the idea that that they went through something unique and wonderful and that they'll never forget it their whole lives. It can be hard to be sentimental about this period. And I say this in part, again, based on my own college experience, because I went to a school that was not fun, and I got a great education, and I did a lot of stuff there. I acted, I ran a magazine, I did this, I did that, I won awards, and I have never given a nickel to the University of Chicago because my memory of the school as an experience that I went through is not very positive because of its atmospherics, and so that is a real thing. That can be a real thing. And then you add in the ideological element, the discomfort that even a 21-year-old is going to feel about watching people walk around shouting "Death to America" in English and in Arabic, and that this is going on and nobody is stopping it and all of that, no matter who they are, no matter what they tell posters. I don't know, things could get really bad. Not every school has a $50 billion endowment. A lot of schools depend on annual giving just to cover their electric bills and things like that. If they have to start dipping into their endowments for operating expenses, that's where endowments start to collapse, particularly, at a time of economic uncertainty. So, I don't know, but we're going to know the effects 20 years from now. We know some of the effects immediately. I don't think any of them are good, by the way. I mean, mostly we have donors pulling billions of dollars out of the Ivies. It's not like they're being replaced by anybody. And it's going to be harder and harder for these schools to accept money from gutter and other places. And I think explicitly, probably in the next 5 years, donations from international givers are going to start being subject to incredible political scrutiny,
which they should have been all along.
Yeah, but I mean, China is not going to have a free run to import thousands of people who come in and then learn how to steal intellectual property. That stuff is going to be happening, and a lot of this is going to change, but it's not going to change in 2026 or 2027, and nothing is replacing it is the other problem, because if the credentialing system that is college collapses, it's still the case that an 18-year-old kid is not cooked enough to start making his or her way, in the real world, just because of the nature of the way we raise children and how little responsibility they get and all of that. They're not. They were shunted off to the side to kind of like bake another, another 4 years until they could
They were
I don't know.
kidults.
Yeah, right. And now, anyway. So I don't know. It's just it's an interesting conundrum. But is there anything else we should discuss before we go on to the recommends? You're shrugging. No one got anything. You got nothing? No? Okay. Everything is bad, by the way, culturally too.
It's a Monday, of course. Yes.
Of course. That's fair enough. Okay. You want to blame it on Monday? That's good. Every day is a Monday right now. But okay, I'm going to make a recommendation. And it's a very hard recommendation to make because it is very important when I make this recommendation and you want to follow it, that you do not Google what I'm about to recommend to you. Because there are things about what I'm about to recommend to you do not want to know, and you need to learn while watching the thing that I'm about to recommend. And you're gonna make a mistake if you Google it, because the things happen that you shouldn't know about, and you'll know about it because it'll pop up like right at the top of your Google search. Because this is something that I watched this weekend, and I got through 6 episodes of it, and so I didn't know anything about it except that our colleague Stephanie Roberts recommended it. Do not Google this. I'm going to tell you a teeny bit about it, and then do not Google it. If you Google it, you're going to ruin it. So do it or don't do it, but don't ruin it for yourself, okay? It's a show called Sugar. It's on Apple TV Plus. It stars Colin Farrell, who is, continuing to have a sort of 30-year career of uncommon, spectacular shading. And in this one, he is playing a private detective who is basically called into modern day LA to look into the disappearance of a legendary movie producer's granddaughter. So classic noir plot. Where is she? She's gone missing. But it's really about him, and he's a film buff, and he's a very, very skilled, but very kind, very thoughtful, very humane person as he is navigating this treacherous world of showbiz and drugs and this and that. And I'm saying nothing else. And do not Google Sugar.
But Amy Ryan is also in it, and she's awesome. She's great.
She's
really good
awesome.
In it. Yes, she's very good.
She is awesome in it, and even James Cromwell, who is a loathsome communist creep, who played the farmer in Babe, and is like basically, would be right now, yelling "Death to America" in an encampment if he weren't 80 years old. He's also in it and is really good. Everybody in it is really good. Last shout out. I'm going to make this crazy shout out to parents. So if you've had a kid in his or her teens or late teens or early 20s, doubtless your kid watched a show called Victorious on Nickelodeon, which is about a school for the arts in California. The show that debuted Ariana Grande. This is where she came from, and it's a very silly show, and it was every girl in America watched it for a couple of years. And on the show, there was a guy who played the hippie acting professor with long hair, and he was a hippie, and he was silly, and his name was something like Kazowitz or something like that. And he was very silly. And suddenly, the guy who played him in Victorious, an actor named Eric Lang, 3 years ago, popped up in the really great and sadly canceled Perry Mason reboot with the guy Matthew Rhys, also an incredible LA noir show, as a corrupt cop. And on Sugar, he plays a drug dealer. And this guy who was like silly and is terrifying. He has become 10 years later one of the most terrifying villains in TV. Like as a sort of guy, he shows up on screen. He chills your blood. And the idea that it's the same guy is just, it's like Bryan Cranston's transition from Malcolm in the Middle to Breaking Bad. Like very little that I can think of that resembles this. And so his name is Eric Lang, and he is fantastic in the show also. So Sugar, no Googling, no nothing, no, don't ask AI, do nothing if you're going to watch it. You don't have to watch it. Don't bother watching it if you don't want to watch it. Christine, I gather you have been watching it. Do you agree with me that people should not?
Do not Google it. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't Google it.
Okay.
But it's fun.
Okay.
It's a fun show.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's fun and beautiful. Beautiful
It's
to look at.
it is beautifully shot. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Google it if you like how it sounds, and watch it. If you don't,
Don't listen. Hey,
Stop.
Abe, it's worse than that. What Abe just did was worse than that.
Shame on you, Abe Greenwald.
Okay, we'll be back. We'll be back tomorrow. So for Abe and Christine and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.